So now we're going to go into our peacemaking scenario. So from here on out, all of the people who are in this space are going to be acting as characters as a part of peacemaking, and they won't be actually reflecting their own values or ideas. So I'm going to read the peacemaking scenario really quickly. Eli Jackson, Stanford class of 1958, died last year. He was the founder and CEO of Jackson Pharmaceuticals, a successful family-owned company for over 50 years, and a generous philanthropist. He was an avid collector of Native American antiquities, most of which his family donated to the Stanford Art Museum in his name after his death. The Eli Jackson wing bears his name. Although the family no longer manages the company, his granddaughter, Sophia, sits on the board of directors. Sophia graduated from Stanford in 2010 and recalls her favorite time is living in your dorm or house. She wants to donate one of the renaming family sculptures from their Native American art collection to your dorm or house in the grandfather's memory. Campus criticism of the family has erupted over allegations that Jackson Pharmaceuticals has contributed to the opioid epidemic and profited from addiction due to its history of patent development and sales of prescription opioids. Last week, a group of students protested on the steps of the art museum chanting, "People over profits," and wearing necklaces of empty pill bottles. Residents of your dorm and house are passionately divided on the issues, especially the sculpture gift. And then we're going to go into a peacemaking circle, which helps focus on this conflict and looks at the real ways that students could react to this kind of conflict in a dorm or that kind of living setting on a campus. So welcome to our peacemaking circle today, everyone. My name is Carson. I'm going to be your peacemaker. I've kind of just gone through this conflict that we are really experiencing in our dorm about this new piece of art that the family of Eli Jackson wants to donate to the dorm. I recognize that all of you are coming from really different viewpoints, but first I'd just like to start with us introducing ourselves and also sharing values from our own lives and from our own backgrounds. So I'll give an example, and then we'll go around the circle, and then we'll actually begin diving deeper into the conflict. So I'm Carson. One value that I hold in my life is honesty. I received this value from my father growing up, and it was because it was just something he always really held me accountable, especially when it came to going to school and doing my homework as a child, and so that's something that's really stuck with me today.
Hello, my name is Domo, and one value that I hold is sincerity, and I got this from my grandmother, who always believes that with everything you do, you should have purpose and intention, and always have the best intentions behind it.
Hello everyone, my name is Foster. One value that I hold deep to me is reciprocity. It's very a part of my culture and my lifestyle. You always give back to people of the community, to Mother Earth, Grandmother Earth, and it's something will always come back to you, and that's something I really value.
Hi everybody, I'm Chon. My value that I want to share is listening more than speaking. I got this value from my father, especially whenever me and my siblings would get in arguments, and make sure to hear both sides and consider them equally. And I think it's an important one for today.
So, Domo, you brought this conflict to peacemaking, so we're going to start with you, and then we'll go around the circle. But if you could just provide a little bit of insight as to where you're coming from, your thoughts about this piece of art, how it's impacting you in your life, and then if each person afterwards could do that as well.
So, my father actually has been impacted with opioid drug use. He became an addict when I was very young, and it was really hard for me and my family growing up. And I think that having this statue here at our dorm is just a reminder, at least to me, of the constant use and abuse that Eli Jackson and his company has brought upon people. I also think opioid use and drug addiction in general is not brought up enough here at Stanford. People tend to ignore it. People tend to think that there are a lot bigger issues, but people don't seem to realize that drug addiction and overdose is a huge problem in America. And I just really don't want this at my dorm. It's a constant reminder to me of all of the hardships that my family and several other families in America has gone through.
So I work at the Stanford Art Museum, and as an Indigenous person, I'm really torn between this because I feel like this piece of art was probably stolen or acquired through a gruesome unknown history from this Native American tribe community, and I feel like there's a moral issue here of why this dorm is being offered this piece from this company that doesn't really represent what this art is and the history behind it.
I acknowledge both of your perspectives. I, however, have a different opinion. I believe that because this piece of art was owned by the Jackson family, and specifically Sophia, who's on the board of directors of the company, I feel like they have a right to offer it to whoever, and I think that Sophia's experience in the dorm is also important and should be honored by this request. And I think that perhaps it's time for other people to consider the perspectives of maybe students who are a little more conservative leaning.
Great. So you're all coming from extremely different places. While your family has been impacted by the opioid epidemic, and that's the reason you don't want it at the dorm, it sounds like Foster's a little bit more torn and maybe doesn't want it at the dorm for other reasons concerning the past that this piece of art has had and how it's impacted Indigenous communities. And on the other hand, we have Chon, who feels like this piece should be in the dorm, and if it's not in the dorm, that his voice and his political leanings are also being silenced. So I just want to recognize that this is obviously really difficult for everyone to bring these emotions forward. And before we continue, I'd just like to take a moment for us to reflect, maybe just a moment of silence, so that we can just decompress before we actually keep going deeper into these issues. So everybody could just take maybe a few seconds to think about what they've heard already and how they want to proceed forward. So Domo, we're going to start with you again. And now I'm hoping that after you've had maybe a little bit of time to reflect and listen to the voices of these other people that are here today, maybe you could provide a little bit of feedback on how their comments made you feel, or how you resonate with the things that they have said and how that impacts you.
Well, firstly, Foster, I do respect your opinion, especially when it comes to the impact on Indigenous people and communities here, the history behind the statue. I can sympathize with that a little bit. I think that's a very good point that you brought up. On the other hand, Sean, I just don't really understand what you mean by taking in the considerations of people who are more conservative leaning. As far as I know, people from both liberal and conservative views all are impacted by opioid overdose and the crisis the same. It doesn't really take into account whether you're conservative or you're liberal or any of that political view. I do respect, though, that Sophia did go to our school and did live in our dorm, and that she is a person with her own views and opinions.
From what I've heard in the last round, feel free, Domo. I send my condolences to you and your family. And just definitely, the community here at the school, they definitely don't recognize, what students like yourself are going through, and the history of opioid addiction. While this art doesn't come directly from the company or the Jackson family, we need to look at the bigger picture of the community and the history of the tribal nation of which this art comes from.
I apologize for not offering my condolences as well to you and your family. you're correct in what you said about it, opioid addiction not having a political agenda. It affects people on both sides. I believe that this whole thing about the art piece is not actually focused on the opioid addiction though. I have a feeling that people are just feeling very strongly against Eli Jackson and his legacy with the company, and so I have trouble being convinced with the issue that you're bringing up. And to your point about people on campus not knowing a lot about the history of the company as well as the indigenous art, would it not be beneficial then to keep the statue in the dorm so that it could be honored and seen by students on a daily basis? Just a suggestion.
Thank you for sharing with each other. Thank you for recognizing the things that each other has said and bringing that into this space. So it seems like we are maybe starting to find some common ground, and maybe now is a time that we can start thinking about resolutions and how we want to move forward. Because peacemaking is based on having consensus, having unanimous consensus. We really want to come up with a plan that works for all parties who are here. So Doma, I'm going to start with you again, and maybe you can provide some suggestions on how you think this situation could be best handled.
My viewpoint still hasn't changed. I still really do not want the statue in our dorm. However, I do recognize that there could be better solutions for what to do with it. And I think one thing that would be very important would be to talk more with the communities that it directly impacts. I recognize what you say, that not to everybody that this statue will mean the same thing to me as it does to me, but I still just really can't have this in my dorm. It just brings back too many unpleasant memories. Maybe to put it back into the Eli Jackson wing in the museum could be an alternate solution.
I think having this piece of art in the dorm wouldn't hurt, but I also want to respect others and how they're feeling. I don't want to have this extra burden on top of schoolwork and other extracurriculars. And so I work, like I said, I work at the art museum. We always get donations of tribal pieces of art. And I know that there wouldn't be any issues of having another piece brought into our exhibits. Maybe us as a community of the dorm, and we can go meet up with Sophia and maybe talk about an alternatives. Maybe she'd be willing to donate it to the museum instead of having it at this dorm specifically. And that's just an idea that I'm thinking of, kind of what Domo said.
I understand the concerns of the indigenous community on campus and those who are directly impacted by opioid addiction. And I don't want, as Foster mentioned, I don't want to make their experiences any more difficult. So I can understand why donating it to the museum or speaking with Sophia about an alternative option would be a good option, and I'm on board with that. However, I really, really believe that a lot of the conservative voices on campus are still being silenced, and I would hope we could have some kind of conversation, maybe a forum within our dorm, talking about why we decided to do what we did with the statue, just so people can understand, and so people who are feeling more conservative can feel like their voices are being heard.
Great. So it sounds like we've come to this resolution that we don't want to have the statue in the house. That sounds like everybody agrees with that. And it sounds like there's also maybe ways that we can incorporate other people's voices into the dorms. It sounds like Domo might be coming from a place where she feels like people impacted by the opioid epidemic are being silenced, indigenous communities are being silenced, and Chon is concerned that conservative views are being silenced as well. So maybe finding ways that next steps forward that we can collaborate on creating forums or spaces or other art or places where these voices can be recognized could also be a way that each person here feels that their voices are recognized. And that just, those are the kinds of things that I've just picked up from what you said throughout the conversation. But before we actually end this, I want to make sure that each of you are comfortable with this plan that we've put forward, and also recognizing that we'll have to put more details into this plan as we go. And we'll have to find, this plan will have to have more structure. But is this something that we agree with right now?
I agree with the plan set forward, and I'm willing to meet up again to figure out the details.
Yes, I'm all for meeting up again and figuring out the details and make sure everyone's comfortable with the placement of this art.
I am also on board with the plan, and I look forward to continuing this conversation with hopefully a little more conservative people as well.
Great. Thank you guys for all being here, and thank you for providing your perspective. We're just going to take another moment to really reflect, another moment of silence, just as a way of ending this peacemaking circle. But I just wanted to thank you for everything you've given to this space. So if we could just have a few seconds.